Welcome back to Esther Alexis, Body of an Extrovert. Okay, so welcome back to Esther Alexis, Body of an Extrovert. Today, I have such a special guest with me. She is a writer that I really admire and someone that I've really come to know, and I'm so excited and happy about it because I just see so many great things in her future. And it is none other than Elohiniar. Am I pronouncing that right?
Close. It's Elohiniar.
Elohiniar.
I was like writing this story in high school that had elves, and Elohiniar was like a warrior elf. I think he was like a minor character. And the truth is, it was so long ago, I actually don't really remember his purpose. But that was the same. And I was writing like my whole language and stuff, but I don't remember any of it. So like my own little elvish going on there.
I love it. But Elohiniar, that's the
Yes.
correct pronunciation.
Yes.
Okay. So Elohiniar is going to be our dream chaser for this season. I'm so super excited. You know that we usually have two. And if I could just do like a small summary as to how we've met. So many of you who do know me know that I am a super geek. I love reading and writing, and I do so anonymously, though not as anonymously as everyone else apparently. And so recently I've stumbled upon, and when I say recently, I mean 2 years ago, I stumbled upon fan fiction writing, which is really so incredible, which is an opportunity really for people who are into shows like animes, mangas, and so many other platforms to kind of continue off where the series leaves off. And so that's kind of how we met. Elohiniar is an incredible writer. She writes currently for the Inuyasha fandom and is huge for the SessxRin fandom, even though she has many opinions upon it that we're going to get into today. But would you like to do an introduction of yourself?
Well, I am 35 years old. It's funny, I'm like a 35-year-old fan fiction writer. I should be too grown up for this. Whatever. I've got 4 kids, which is awesome. They are 9, 7, 4, and 1. Boy, boy, girl, girl. So I'm all even. Yes.
Good.
I'm trying to think what else is pertinent about me. I'm a stay-at-home mom, part-time student, majoring in psychology. I have been writing since I was 11. Actually, I kind of went from playing with dolls, and like, I don't know how other people play with dolls, but I had like these long, drawn-out stories that would last for like weeks. So I literally went from playing with my dolls and my Barbies and their long, drawn-out dramas to writing drama, basically. Like, it just went from one to the other. So I don't think I ever actually grew up. And then I was like, I don't know if I was like on a hiatus from fan fiction or just like, I had a hard time writing like the last 10 years roughly, but then I started writing fan fiction, and then I finally watched Final Act for Inuyasha, and it inspired me, and I'm like, what's going to happen to the Shomu and Ren now, you know? What happens in their future? And then it spawned a ton of stories in 1 year.
Honestly, as someone who has read your stories, I am so absolutely grateful that you are back. And I think that you transitioned well right into Barbies, into writing beautiful little novellas. That's what I call them in my head. Can I ask what originally, pulled you into like the anime community? I ask because many of my own friends don't really get the hype. I think now it's a little more mainstream, but what kind of pulled you in?
So I'm trying to think the first stuff. I know Yu-Gi-Oh was the first thing I watched. It was in English.
The classics.
Classics. I really liked it. I never finished it because like it was on Fox. It was like when it was originally airing on Fox when I was 18. So that was like 17 years ago. It was a long time ago. So I got into that, and then me and my mom were staying at a hotel once, and I saw Inuyasha, and I was like, this is really cool. I really like this. But then I found it in Japanese, and I liked it even better. So then like I kind of got addicted to the stories, because I find that anime and manga, they tell like really deep stories. They're not surface level stories. They're not they're not fluff, which is funny.
They're not superficial.
They're not superficial. They're very deep. You've got so there's a few, like, I love Studio Ghibli, like everything they put out. I have watched I didn't watch Graveyard of the Butterflies because I just couldn't do that to myself. Even I have limits. But I've watched like all of their stuff, and I really just like, I like the character development. I like how in depth the characters go. I like the anti-heroes and the action sequences and just how human, and I don't know, I love everything about anime.
You know, I have to say what I really appreciated about what I think it's an art form, like just straight out non-debatable. What an art form that anime and manga have been is that they let people who have no idea what the Japanese culture is about really just get this like in-depth look. I mean, of course, it's like, you know, through these stories and through these fictional characters, but you kind of do see like, you know, these societal flaws that did exist back in the day, and so many different kinds of like human, I want to say just human pitfalls that are still happening today that are so relatable. And I think that that's what makes it so incredible, is that we see these stories and we relate. Like, I can't even put into words how much I relate to some of the stories that are just out there. I know a huge one, which is mainstream. And I don't know if you're a fan. I know it's Naruto. But it's like so many people relate to these stories, to these characters, just because they're just so, they speak to humanity. They really do speak to the transgressions, to the love, to the beauty, to the hideousness that is just humanity. And I just love it. I think that's what makes it so addictive, is that we can see ourselves in these characters, or we want to see ourselves in these characters. And I love it. I also want to point out that I love that fandoms, you know, like Fanfiction, like Wattpad, so many other places where people are allowed to kind of do their own continuation of the stories, like bring people of completely different backgrounds together, completely different age groups. When I originally had come on to Fanfiction, honestly, I thought I was probably the oldest person up there. I am currently 24. That is not the case.
No.
I know, but like there are like almost elderly people up there, and they know their stuff. Like they're so excited about it. They're so incredible. And I had to, first and foremost, I have to ask, how do you find the time to be an incredible writer? Because when she's super humble about it. She's like, it spawned a few stories over the course of the year. She like has an entire series up there. Like, she has this incredible following up there. I am addicted to her writing. I won't even get into like the disgust that was my sobbing profusely for a weekend over one of her like chapters. But how do you even find the time to like manage stay-at-home mom, part-time student, writer?
I mean, like, so at first, I think the fact that I wasn't writing at all, kind of like it turned definitely into an addiction when I was first doing it. It's like literally any second I had to myself when I first started writing. Like, it was right before finals last year that I started watching Inuyasha again. And, you know, always, you know, the question, what happens with the Shomer and Rin? But like, I found myself just like, I'm gonna write the continuation, but I'm gonna do it in like my spare time. So spare time for me is like, okay, so is my husband busy with the kids? Like after 6 o'clock, you know, he's well at the minute because of the pandemic, you know, he's coming down the stairs instead of coming home from work. But you know, he's getting off from work, he takes the kids. So I'll sit down and write something, or like if they're busy playing outside, I'll write something. I'll try to carve out an hour when my baby is sleeping to get the other three doing something so I can, like, you know, I can write. Last year was a little bit easier because my boys were in school and my girls were at home. At least 2 or 3 times a week, the 2 girls would be sleeping at the same time. That's not really the case at the minute, so it's a little bit harder for me to find time right now. But like, I actually I asked one of my favorite authors, and she responded. I was like, you know, you're a mom of young kids, like, and I know you got published in your 20s. Like, how did you do it? And she's like, I wrote like every spare minute I could, like 15 minutes during, you know, the swim lessons, you know, we're at the park, I'll take my computer with me. Just like, you just squeeze it in wherever you can. Like, and I feel like when you're a parent and you have so much less time than you used to have, like, you learn to squeeze things in, whereas a single person, you don't feel like you can, but you never realize how much time you have until you have no time at all. This is kind of how I feel.
No, I think, dude, I think that is exactly what it is. I'm trying to find the balance. Like, I have told you many times that I'm just inspired by your schedule keeping. Like, even you saying that, I'm like, where do I have the spare time between like the 40-hour work week that actually feels like 50 hours, like the running in between volunteer work, all this stuff. But then I found like I will carve in time for reading literally at like the crack of dawn at like 4 a.m. I'll be like, okay, we'll read. And then I'll go back to sleep and then wake up for work. And then I'm like, maybe I can write during that time. That could be a space as well.
Yeah.
But I have to say, as someone who has read what is truly like a small series of I don't even know, what are you calling the series for Sesshomaru and Rin?
So actually on AO3 Archive of Our Own, it's called Tales of the Dog Lord. So it's actually, because on AO3 it actually allows you to put it into a collection, so it can be like a collection of stories. So technically for me it's Tales of the Dog Lord, which I think it's going to wrap up with the last story that I'm working on, the disease. It'll just be like, you understand, like all of these are like stories of like, you know, the Dog Lords, the Shomer and Rin. So yeah.
So my question is, in regard to your series Tales of a Dog Lord, my question is, because I know that your readers have to feel the same way, why is it that you are so addicted to writing these tragically beautiful romances? Like, I say tragically beautiful because I am someone who loves romance. I don't know a woman who doesn't love romance, but you take such an angsty spin on it. And you just make it so surreal, so painful to actually be in love with these characters. And I have to give it to you. I def see your psychology degree just coming in there, like wherein you make us fall in love, like irrevocably in love with these characters. And then you're like, and here are their character flaws way later down the line when you didn't see it coming. And it turns out to be tragic, this painful romance almost. Like, where does that come from? Where does that inspiration come from, and why?
Oh, well, I don't know if I actually meant it like that. Like, it's so funny. Like, so with Shomer's heart, like, was more just like what happens when she grows up, you know? What happens when Rin is not this little girl anymore and she's a woman with her own opinions. And I know, like, you know, the arguments out in public about, you know, the properness of their relationship and whatever. But for me, I'm like, he's going to live forever. She's going to live for, like, you know, a short period of time. And at some point, if I were her and I had this dog demon that was hot visiting me, I would totally get a crush on him. So, like,
Of course, there's no other alternative.
exactly, like, it would happen. So, like, that was the first story. And, like, I wanted it to be adventurous, like Rumiko Takahashi style. Like, I wanted her to be her own person. Like, I've had reviews on that story. It's like, why isn't she asking Sesshomaru for help? Like, why isn't she going to him for help? I'm like, because she doesn't want his help. Like, in that story, she is her own person. She wants to be her own woman. And, like, she already knows things are sketchy between them in the beginning. So, like, it's funny because, like, I didn't mean for that one to be as angsty as apparently it was angsty. I didn't mean it was. Apparently it was angsty. And then the second story just kind of came like right after the first story. Like, basically with the second book, I wanted to explore the Shomaru's issues with, you know, himself, basically. Like, I don't believe for a minute, and I mean, if the creators with the sequel goes somewhere else, that's fine, but I don't believe for a minute that even if it was with Rin, that his mind wouldn't go to just even momentarily like, oh crap, like, I just did what I hated my father for. Like, I went and had a relationship with a human and now she's pregnant and she's going to have a half human. And so, like, it's very, like, their relationship is very rushed at that point. Like, they're definitely living in the euphoria until his brother attacks. And so I came up with his brother because I'm like, I need something really strong, something that can stand up to Bakusaiga, his sword, because, you know, his sword can kill 1,000 demons in one stroke. So it's like,
Yeah.
gotta get someone tough in there. And I'm looking, I want someone who's manipulative, who has like a grudge against him. So I was like, why not an evil half brother from his mother's side? Like, you know, why not? Let's just throw Toma in there. So Toma was like, I had so much fun writing him. He's such an evil fuck. I'm like, he's sorry. He's so evil. He's so mean. So, like, with that story, like, it was like, okay, so like they're gonna deal with their, like, you know, social issues of the fact that she's pregnant. But then all of a sudden he's faced off with somebody that is much stronger than him. Plus, like, that bond with the sword where he would feel her pain and her emotions and everything with the sword that they figure out in the end was, like, not the healthiest thing in the world because it kind of caused him to die. So I blame that on the author Fanfiction, who wrote Snowbound. I don't know if you've read that, because I was actually
read Snowbound. I did. I absolutely did.
It's her fault I killed Sesshomaru in that story. It's her fault that he dies and gets resurrected. And then, like, I don't know, like, I wanted at the end of the story to just explore his emotional journey with becoming his father. And I wanted to give, like, credence to that, because I have never believed that he would just be with a human and be okay. So, like, that's kind of how the second book came along. The third book was like, I'm not ready to let go of these characters yet, and I'm still having fun writing them, and now they have their own house, and what demon is going to mess with them this time? And literally, I like to torture Sessxrin when I write. And the only way to torture him is to torture Rin.
I mean, it's working, and by torturing them, you're torturing us. Like, keep going, keep going.
Yeah. So I mean, Lost Memories was like, what would happen if Rin, they have like, you know, this, like, I set up this like really deep, intimate relationship with them. You know, they had got like, you know, the spiritual, emotional, physical intimacy. Like, I really have tried to also not to focus just on the physical aspect of their relationship. Like, that there's so much more to it than just that. And so with Lost Memories, what happens when the person you love is there but not there all at the same time? So like, it's funny because like, a lot of people focus on Rin in that story, but for me it was kind of beautiful writing to show me, because all of a sudden he had to step in as the dad where he had not been. I mean, like, he was a dad before, but like he really had to fill Rin's shoes, you know.
Play both parents at once, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, like, she no longer knew who her children was. She no longer knew who anyone was. And so, like, you know, he almost had to, like, fall in love with her and get in touch with her. And it actually came after Instinct that I was like, I should have made Toma responsible for that. So I'm just going to go back and tweak that. So actually, I went back and tweaked Lost Memories to where Toma was actually responsible for what happened. Instinct, which is probably my most controversial work, and I will give it that, is totally my most controversial work.
It is. I think so, for sure. I think it definitely started a controversy that can never ever be closed now, but
no, it can't. Like, it's funny because like I almost wish like I had written that and the disease more like right after, because the disease, you get like the full circle of like the Shomaru's character with how badly that really did affect him. But like, the idea came from like, you know, like people with the mating fever and, you know, mating marks, and if you smell your mate, then you have like no control over, and you go get them. And I'm like, so what happens when there's more than one mate? Let's just turn this trope on its head. And I'm like, because like people kept commenting on it in my stories, like, you know, where's the mating mark? She should live forever, because I don't write the typical SessxRin stories at all. And so I'm like, literally the first scene I thought of is the one that torments you and made you cry all weekend long. So like, it's funny because everyone would be like, you knew that was going to happen? I was like, that's the first scene I wrote, was in the forest.
God. It killed me. Well, we'll get there, but murdered me.
Yeah, so like that whole story for me was like, okay, so I want to put the showrunner in a position where he literally breaks down and cries. Like, I want to break him. And in this case, but it's funny because with Rin, the opposite thing happens. Like, it does break her in a way, but from that breaking, like, she's like the phoenix in that story, because she gets much stronger by the end of the story. And especially after what happened at the end of the last book when I made a miscarriage. I'm so mean. Well, really what had happened is a friend of mine, I was 5 months pregnant. I went to her house and I was going to tell her that I was pregnant. And right before I could tell her, she told me that she had just miscarried. And I was like, So I actually didn't tell her I was pregnant because I felt too, like, I don't know, like, I mean, like, I just felt like the wrong time to tell her.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of friends who've miscarried. So like, it's like, it would be nice. I planned on giving them that baby, but at the same time, I wanted to pay homage to like all the women out there that miscarry. I mean, like, it's 1 in 4 pregnancies, and it's not something people talk about. So it's like my subtle way of saying like, hey, like, it happens. So with that, So like with that, I mean, it kind of broke Rin. And then moving on to like Instinct with her, like, she kind of gets to get stronger while in a way he gets weaker, and his greatest weakness pretty much, and again, all of this is Toma being a butthead. He's like, how can I torment? I want to kill my brother. My brother's evil. He scarred my face, and he's an arrogant whatever, and I'm crazy, and I hate him. So that's kind of where Instinct came from. And like, the disease with the reincarnation story is totally a product of my readers, because they're like, you need to write a reincarnation story. And I want to know about the disease that killed all the demons. And no matter what I could do, I couldn't write the two separately. Like, every time I was like, okay, this story and this story, I'm like, it wouldn't come together. And then when I pushed them together, then all of a sudden I was like, yes, perfect, it's together. But now with the link, now that the link the story is going to end up being, I'm like, it really could have been 2 separate stories, but whatever.
Like, I have to say, there's literally so much that you've said there that, like, was a gold mine, even just explaining. Well, first and foremost, the thing that I want to talk about is just the way that you portray your characters. Like, these are, again, when you're talking about fan fiction and, you know, fandoms, what you are doing is taking someone else's characters and making them your own. And so when you just talk about really more than just the character as we know them as like this flat surface, because first and foremost, SessxRin and Rin aren't even the primary characters of Inuyasha. They're like side supporting characters. They're incredible characters, but they're supporting characters. And so I feel as though, particularly in that case, and we've seen it on your end as well, when you kind of take it on your own, I feel as though people feel like you're deviating from what they know. And so there might be like, you know, audience backlash there. Like, I know that you've experienced that. Do you want to speak to that and how making your characters deviate or whole in your opinion have contributed to like audience reactions?
I feel like with the SessxRin and Rin, and honestly the Inuyasha fandom in general, I deviated from fanon. I don't 100% feel like I deviated from canon completely. There's certain things that I know that I have. Like, I have no idea about these bonds between dog demons and their human lovers. I know that was when Azalea was in labor in the third movie that somehow Toga knew, and like he went to rescue her. So there had to be some kind of connection. And then Asate, you know, there's the whole like when he's like, you know, if you like call me and if you can't speak, whistle and I'll come. Like the distance doesn't matter. So there has to be some
kind of connection.
Yeah, some connection somehow. So really what I had realized I did is that I deviated from fanon. I did not really deviate from canon. So when I took them and made them mine, like I actually had not read any fan fiction in like 10 plus years. So I had no idea that mating marks had become a thing, immortality, making them have pure-blooded children. So when I started reading all these stories, I was like, why are they having pure-blooded children?
What is this
mating mark thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, what's this mating mark thing? I'm like, I'm not 100% against all of them. I mean, like, I really don't actually like the trope because there is beauty in death, personally, is what I think. There's beauty in either her having to say goodbye to him or him having to say goodbye to her. Painful, tragic beauty, but that I love to write about. Make myself cry. I make myself cry, don't worry. For as much as I make everyone else cry, I cry too. So like I feel like I made them like I don't know if like I was purposely trying to make them mine, but I wanted to write like a love story of all ages where like, you know, they connect on a deep level. It's not just about the smut. So I think in some ways those are the areas that I deviated because I am willing to touch on Rin dying. I am willing to, you know, touch on SessxRin's flaws that were very apparent in canon material. I mean, Rumiko gave us an extremely flawed character to work with. Yes, I feel like that's kind of like, I don't know, I just took them and made them mine, and I definitely deviated from fanon, and I have had some flames for it. At first, I was upset by them. Now I just don't really care, although I'm willing to tell people off in the chapters in my stories and be like, you don't like it, go read something else. I've had a few people that were like stalker flamers, and I'm like, guys, seriously, like,
oh God,
read something else. I know I'm making you have the feels, but you don't have to keep reading my chapters. You can go find your fluffy 6,000 other stories on fanfiction.net that are there, and I don't know how many on AO3.
Dude, I agree with you. And I actually agree with your perception as well. I feel as though, because I have my own story, not nearly as complex and convoluted as your own, but like it's my own story. And I also feel like realistically, when you kind of look at the characters that she's created, I'm like, this is a man who has so many character flaws to overcome, particularly because of what his predecessor did before him. And he's not really healed from that. And I'm like, then he's raising this young girl. And she's not only witness to that, but, you know, those things are fed into her. So how does that feed into her self-esteem when he, you know, denounces her entire race just over and over and over, whether or not he's caring for her? And then also because of her environment, like a lot of people have come to me, and I'm sure they've come to you. They're like, you know what? Like, you know, she's not this headstrong. Women couldn't be this headstrong. And I'm like, pardon me for thinking that she has to be that headstrong to survive in his world, you know? And I think it only makes sense. And I think that like what you've said is also so enlightening in that I think that fanon is definitely a thing, and people expect you to kind of stick to those rules. But I have to say, I really respect and admire the authors who come in with their own stories, their own, you know, versions of their characters, and kind of stick with their guns. I love it, because I know that there have been authors on many platforms, whether it's just in any way of expression as well, who are kind of chased out because they don't necessarily follow the status quo, whatever that is. And I'm like, you know, good girls seldom make history, man. And I think that you have made history by not following the status quo.
You know, just touching on the way you and I present Ren, I always just tell people, I'm like, okay, let's just like look at Sango. Sango was not a soft-spoken, sweet, angelic girl. And if you look at who was raising Ren, she was raised by Inuyasha, Kagome. Yep. You know, we've got a half demon with a bad attitude. And if you listen to the way he talks in Japanese, he is so rude. He doesn't even use the polite forms of saying you. He pretty much uses like time and tamida, which is like the equivalent of being like, hey bastard, what's up? Like, he's rude. So you've got, you know, him and, you know, his wife, you know, who's a priestess, and then you have the slayer, and then a monk, and, you know, she's being raised by another priestess. Plus, you know, Shippo and Kahaku are around, another slayer, another demon. Plus, she's being raised by Sesshomaru and Jokin, you know, with them visiting whatever. And I'm like, where in all this is she going to be a little girl sitting in her little field of flowers, making flower crowns, and pining for Sesshomaru to love her? Like, I mean, like, honestly, when I came back and I started reading fan fiction, I'm like, but where's my tough girl? Like, why is she sitting in a corner for like 5-10 years waiting for him to love her? Why isn't she
Precisely.
like, can she have a job? I mean, like, can she have friends? Like I need to see a strong Ren, and I need to see their relationship be more equal, because I hate when people are like, oh, it's her lord. And I'm like, dear God in heaven, can they please, like, when she's in private, can she call him just the Shomaru? Can they like just be a couple? Because if he wanted someone who was going to be like, oh my lord, in private, like, he could have married anyone. He didn't need her for that.
I think that some people get so stuck in the fact that, you know, he's a lord, and like in this relationship he's still a lord and she's like some kind of maidservant to him her entire life. I'm like, is that really truly a relationship though, you know?
Mm-hmm. I feel people get stuck on the smut. There was actually a whole conversation on Discord. It actually kind of blew up and went south a little bit, but there was a few of us, me included, that are like, I love the explicit sex scenes. I write them. I mean, I like writing them. I will read them in other people's stories. But at the same time, like, if that's all a relationship is, then what is their relationship? Like, if we're making it a love story, any female could suffice to sit in his room and be intimate with him and bear his children. If you're making it a love story. So like, for me, like, people in fan fiction, and I've edited fandom wide. I've like worked with people for Harry Potter and Star Trek and a few other things who have like, this is my one true pairing. And the one question I always ask them is why? What makes it, like, what draws them together? If it's not like your typical pairing, like Draco and Hermione is a big thing in the Harry Potter world. But if you ask anyone why, yeah, it's a very interesting, it's kind of like the SessxRin. Like, it's kind of like the SessxRin. It's like this crack pairing that got really popular. And I'm like, the same question I always ask people is like, why? So what's your motivation? Why are you putting these two together? What do they give each other, other than the fact that, like, there's the sexual aspect? And I think for some people, especially because Sesshomaru is like this sex god, that they don't always think past the smut scenes to what actually draws them together as a couple. You know, besides that, I guess for me is like, what are you doing to bring them together? Because anyone could be a demon lord's wife or a lord of the land's wife. I guess it's kind of like my thing.
Yeah, no, definitely agreed. And I think, well, even speaking about you know, the original show, it's not a show, it's not a canon, it's not a fandom that is so super happy and fluffy. It's not the Teletubbies. If it was, it wouldn't be where it's at today, and it wouldn't be getting a sequel. Which I have to ask, how do you feel about the sequel?
I am excited about it. I had like 7 people contact me, and they're like, so did they like contact you and get rights? Because like there's there's some similarities between like the sequel and your stories. And I'm like, really? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't really, whatever. I don't feel like there is. So like, it was kind of at first, I think I was actually on cloud nine because people were like, oh, are you writing the sequel? I'm like, I'm not writing the sequel.
They
God, I
should.
don't.
They should bring you in. That's all I'm gonna say. They should bring you
I
into the
know.
writers' room. I would love it. But continue.
Yes, like if it starts bombing, let me know and I'll help you fix it. I'm just joking. Yeah, so I am overall super excited about it. I am a little nervous about who the mom of the twins, of the Showman's girls, are. And a lot of that, I think, just goes back to like, is SessxRin going to be canon? Is it not going to be canon? You know, because it is definitely a controversial ship. I never actually thought it was. It's so funny that it's so controversial.
It is. It is.
Yeah. So overall, I'm just excited. I think they've got a great setup going for them with like the fire separating everyone, with, you know, Inuyasha and Gome's daughters not knowing them. And I think, you know, that's funny because like it's interesting to see the fan reaction from when you're a psychology buff and everyone is like, well, they had to have abandoned her because they can't be dead. And I'm like, well, you know, Kagome would not abandon her daughter. So like,
Yeah.
something happened. Something major went down 10 years before that separated everybody from everybody. So like, and you know, whatever it is has to be strong enough to take the Shomaru out, because like, he's not just like your small, tiny little demon, you know, which is, again, it's something I had to deal with when I was writing my story. So it's funny because I can totally relate to the writers when you're coming up with who's this big bad gonna be, and everyone's like, well, what about the original cast? I'm like, you know, the original cast, they told their story already. And when people are like, but why is it more about the Shomaru's kids than Inuyasha and Gome's? I'm like, well, because their story is over. Their story ended. Like, they had a nice wrap up. There are no questions. Like, it's funny when I write my travels for them, like, I really have to pull deep because there's not a lot left to tell about them. They ended up together. They had kids. They lived, you know,
Happily ever after in that order kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. So like, overall, I'm pretty happy. I'm excited. I think it's going to be good. I'm just waiting for more details. At the minute, pretty much. That's all I'm doing.
I am so super excited about it myself, but part of me wonders, because, you know, we're kind of living in this day and age where sequels are becoming a thing. Like, you know, we think of like the Toy Stories that keep coming back, the Incredibles that made the comeback 20 years later, not 20 years later, like 14 years maybe, I think. And I'm wondering, should we have left it alone? Did it end perfectly? Or were we just not satisfied with what we had? I mean, I think that there's something to be said about things left to the imagination. That's why fandoms are created, you know? Like you mentioned, the story of Inuyasha and Kagome, like we're settled. We're good there. There's no animosity left. There's no anxiety at night when you go to sleep wondering what happened to your favorite characters. Whereas for Rin and Shishomaru, you're like, she grows up. What happens then? Is it Kohaki? Was it her? All the angst, all the problems. Like, how are they overcoming these things? And I'm wondering, would it have been better left off, you know, with us kind of running with our imaginations?
I I have felt that, honestly, because like, I am in a rush to finish the disease before the sequel comes out, because my motivation will go from like, you know, like high to low, depending on who the mom ends up being. And not to mention, like, in my brain, Yuki, Harutoga, and Tayomara are their children. And so these two girls, it's nice that they exist, but those are not. That's literally how my brain thinks. Because I'm like, you know, my story is my canon. Thank you very much.
Got it.
Whatever. It's my own little arrogance, but I'm in a rush to finish my own stories. So I'm like, God, my stories are going to be AU after this. They're going to be the alternate universe.
Yeah.
So I think if they write it, like my hope, when I have shared this with many people, is that, you know, New Evil, it definitely helps to focus on Sesshomaru's daughters more than Inuyasha's, because there's still a story to tell with Sesshomaru.
Mm-hmm.
There's as far as I've been told recently, like, originally Rumiko was going to kill him, but he was so popular that she chose not to. And instead, she gave us this perfect anti-hero with amazing character growth and like depth that just, like, you know, you really get to see like this amazing relationship happen between him and his brother. And I'm so opinionated about that too. So I think as long as they stick to like the newer, fresher side, they put a new like villain in there, and we don't see a lot of I mean, I want to see the original cast, but if we focus on the original cast, it's going to bomb, is my own personal opinion. We need something new, something fresh, something that just is a complete and new storyline based off, you know, these three girls and their adventure to, you know, getting Satsuna's memories back. And as long as they do that, I think it'll be good. I have heard from people that are like, oh, but Boruto sucks. I don't know, because I never saw Naruto and I don't plan on seeing Boruto. So, you know, I think it just depends on how they revamp it, because you can tell a good story, but sometimes you can leave well enough alone.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. But I wouldn't mind seeing snippets of the past. I think that, you know, especially as she's going to get her memories back, I think we're going to see, you know, whoever her parents were, you know, who influenced her, how she ended up where she's at. So I think that we all are going to be pretty curious about that. Now, questions about the writing semantics. So I know that you said that, you know, smut is definitely not the end all be all when it comes to a relationship. However, when it comes to fanfics, people love a good smut. How does one write a good smut? What inspires a good smut?
Being in the bedroom with your husband. No, seriously, like, I tried writing steamy scenes before I got married, and I'm not even joking when I say I was very sexually reserved before I got married. I was definitely a good girl. So I think, you know, it helps if you are in a sexual relationship with someone, because then you understand, especially how the female body works, because reaching, let's say, certain pleasurable, you know, heights is not an easy feat if you don't know what you're doing, and it can take years to get to know your body well enough to do that. So, like, I don't know, when I sit down, it's hilarious because I actually have to hide my computer. Smut scenes are harder for me to write right now because I have a kid that will like pop up over my shoulder, and I'm like, crap. Shut the computer, like, don't look at my stories. And I have another kid that's learning how to read. He's like, I'm going to try to read what you're writing. And I'm like, no, you're not.
Oh, God. The horror, the utter horror.
Yeah. So I turn on, like, I actually literally have a playlist of, like, lovemaking music. Like, it's hilarious. It's the track I turn on for, like, there's a few songs from Braveheart. There's some stuff from Avatar. There is, I'm trying to remember, there's some from other different movies, like, that have had, like, lovemaking scenes and stuff where I, like, take the songs from that. And, you know, just kind of like think about, like, how would it go? Like, what would they do? What would they say to each other? Like, how would the interaction go? Like, is it hot and fast? With one of the people I edit and co-write for, I usually have to pull the reins on her because their smut scenes go like really fast. And when people want smut, they want to like
drag it out.
Drag it out. You want like a 5-page smut. So it can't just go to like straight into like, you know, having sex right away. And so usually I try to think of like, you know, the foreplay, like what are they doing to get in the mood? Because usually like there's teasing and stuff when you're, especially like when you're married, like, you know, you start eyeing each other and like you start like, you know, casually elbowing each other or something. And then, you know, once you're in the bedroom, like how do things go from there? Like what do you do to like help each other stay aroused? And, you know, obviously culmination of sex at the end, that part's pretty easy to write. Except for sometimes you can experiment with positions, you know, but there's really only so many ways you can write a sex scene. Like there really is, which is why I don't like flooding my stories with just sex, because it can get extremely boring.
No, that is actually so true. If you've ever stumbled upon like a fanfic that is just pure smut and you're like, are we gonna have a conversation at some point? Like, I don't know if that's just the woman in me, but I'm like, can we talk now? Can we like, let's get to know each other on a verbal, mental, emotional level. Let's do that. Like, I think that you're definitely right. And what I appreciate in a good story, and again, like, I know that I'm definitely hyping you here, but what I appreciate in your stories in particular as well is like, I feel as though you don't run into it. I think that there's a build emotionally, mentally, like there has to be kind of that, those connections have to meet first before we even get there. And I appreciate that because the fact is a lot of people do run right into it and you're like, what is happening? Like, why are we even doing this?
Something historically interesting for that time in Japan is that women were literally just told to lay down and spread it. Their pleasure, it didn't matter in feudal Japan. So that's something else that like I like to subtly touch on, is the fact that he does actually take his time to make sure she's happy. And they have in I think in Travels they have a conversation about it, that like in the human world, had she married a human, she would have been just told to lay down and have sex. And when the men wanted more, they would go to the pleasure districts. They would go to the geishas and the prostitutes in the pleasure districts. And that's where the more, the smut we like reading about would actually happen. So like, I kind of also like to show like what respectful sex in a relationship looks like, that, with consent. I have huge issues in the SessxRin fandom with smut, because if you look at a lot of the dojins, like the people who draw their own comics, and a lot of, especially the AUs, there's times she flat out tells him to stop, that he's hurting her, and it just happens anyway, and then she loves him for it. And I'm like, guys, that's not consent.
And that doesn't seem realistic.
No, I mean, like, I know he's a demon and everything, but he wouldn't rape her. Like, that just, like, and it totally, to me, like, I don't know, it just, like, denigrates Rumiko's character. And so, like, that's also, I guess, where some of my inspiration for it comes from, because I just really don't like in the AUs when people are like, hey, let's make it like this. Or even in the, like, the canon-based ones where he pretty much is an animal. And I'm like, that doesn't really teach people what respectful sex is. I mean, I don't know if we have that responsibility as writers, but in a way, I feel that responsibility.
Actually, it's so funny that that's the perfect segue, because I think that to some extent, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think to some extent we do have a responsibility as writers, that, the media that we create, the content that we create and put out there and share, people, whether or not we want to believe it, take it to heart, take it to mind, and sometimes might even put it to action. Like, that's just a thing. That's what literature does. That's what media does, TV and all of it. And so I feel like it's so important that when writing, at least for myself, that I make it a point that it's like, everyone in here is respectful of the other person, especially when it comes to one's agency, one's sexuality, like even things about like drugs and stuff. Consent, like, I think that there is some responsibility for the writer to kind of be like, hey man, like, this is how the story is going to go, but I don't necessarily believe it. They put it necessarily on the top and they're like, I don't believe that this is how things should go in the 21st century, but for the story's purposes, this is how it goes. Or just, hey man, this story is just not going to include, people not consenting, lolicons, all of that. I don't even know how that exists, but you know what I mean? I think there is a responsibility for it, but I think it's debatable, because some people are also like, hey, it's my story and I'm not telling anyone to go out and do this either. So yeah, I definitely get that as well. But then when we go to the other part of writing, when it's just not the smut, when it's the emotional, when it's just the dialogue, how do you also, do you kind of set a limit for yourself? Like, hey, each chapter will be maybe 5 pages or such? Because I find that I struggle where I either write very long chapters or very short chapters. So is there like, a quota for you where you're like, this is a chapter, this is how long it's going to be? No?
Not really, no. So with the first 4 installments, because I mean the Drabbles are basically all one shot stuffed into, like, one story. So I wrote SessxRin's Heart all in one shot. But then, like, afterwards, I actually literally had to go and separate chapters. And some chapters were long, some chapters were short, and some people were like, can we get longer chapters? And it's funny, when the chapters got longer, can I get even longer chapters? So SessxRin's Sphere was written the same way, just all in one shot, and Lost Memories all in one shot, and Instinct also all in one shot. And then I'd have to go back and separate. But with Instinct, I was just nuts, and I put all the chapters in at like 10,000 words, because I thought that was normal. Actually, professional writers stick to 2,500 to 5,000 words. So literally my Instinct, all the chapters are like 2 times as long, and the story probably could have been twice as long as it actually was. So I literally just wrote and got it out. I'm like, I'll worry about chapters later. With the disease is told in point of views of a handful of the characters, both past and present. And so with that one, I consider the fact that the chapters are much shorter than what I usually write, but I also used to put multiple points of view into one chapter. So with this, I'm like, you know what? I don't care. Some chapters are going to be 500 words. Some chapters are going to be 5,000 words. Usually if there's more words in them, it means there's smut in there. Because it just takes up more work. But I don't really set a goal for myself. It's more like I view chapters as like mini stories. Like, what story are you telling in this chapter? And like when I coach other writers on fan fiction, that's basically what I tell them is like, they're like, well, how long should it be? Should I make it longer? I'm like, well, it depends. Like, what are you trying to tell? What's going to happen in this chapter? Like, what story, what points are you going to bring up?
I really like that mentality of what story are we telling in this chapter. I've actually never thought of it that way. That could actually really help with some writer's block, I have to say. And so speaking of which, like, I know that you said you took a 10-year hiatus. Do you ever find yourself having the occasional writer's block? How do you get through it?
So, oh my gosh. So my writer's block really started happening from becoming more religious and wanting to write more wholesome material. And I can't write wholesome material. It's just not in my veins. So I think my 10 years writer block literally happened because I write, you know, violent, angst, emotional. I mean, like, we could live without the smut and some of the stuff. I mean, like, it's nice. We could live without it. So, like, I think for me, what helps is just going back and like figuring out what works. Actually, I also have a friend that I talk to who is, she's not in the Inuyasha fandom, but she's like, so if you ask her, she'll say she's a professional fangirl. She's one of the Atomic Pixies. They are an art group based out of Denver, and she and I have known each other since high school. We've been writing together since high school. Like, we used to write stories literally together. Like, we'd read and edit each other's stories and bounce ideas off each other. So in general, if I get really stuck, I talk to her. One of my other strategies is, if you don't like it and you're getting writer's block, chances are your readers aren't going to like it and they're going to be getting bored. So change it up, even if it means you have to hack stuff in half and like scrap a large amount of the story. Like, go back to where it was exciting and make it exciting. Conflict drives the plot. With fan fiction writers, unfortunately, we have picked up a lot of bad habits, I've noticed, and a lot of that translates, I think, into unfinished stories. So when people want just fluff, they don't realize that they're having trouble finishing stories because fluff does not drive a plot. Mm-hmm. Like, I mentioned in the last chapter, I don't know if you read it, of Fire and Ice, that like I had gotten stuck once the showrunner, I mean, this is like, you know, the AU, he's in a wheelchair. So I'd gotten stuck with him being in the hospital with pneumonia. And I'm like, God, where am I going with this? Like, fluff, because the story is supposed to be fluffy. This is my attempt to be fluffy, because everyone's like, oh, Elohiniar, you need to be fluffy. But like, I couldn't do it. Like, I needed something to segue into the rest of the story. So I'm like, you know what? A run-in with an abusive ex-boyfriend, that'll work it. So like, I really think conflict really drives the plot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, so I have to say then, because you obviously coach other writers, for those who are, because I actually do have a friend of mine, for those who are interested in writing and kind of just don't know where to begin, what would your advice be for them?
Just write. It doesn't matter how bad it is. It doesn't matter how disorganized. Like, I currently help 3 people with, actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it publicly, but I currently work with 3 people who are very amateur writers. And in the beginning, they were very nervous to share what they had to write. And I'm like, you know, it doesn't really matter. You just write. Like, you know, prompts, I remember we used in high school, like, take a picture of something and sit down and, you know, describe the scenery. If you just start writing and read a lot, reading definitely helps, because there's tons of amazing authors out there. So, you know, read a lot and then just write, just start writing. And hopefully in fan fiction, it's a little bit harder to find betas who will work with amateur writers. There's quite a few of them who refuse to work with amateur writers. There's a very small market of ones that'll actually work with people who need more than just like grammar and spelling. So I would say, first off, just write. After that, remember, conflict drives the plot. I can't say that enough times, but it does. You know, conflict and character growth. Like, for everything that happens to your character, how does that change them as a person or a demon, you know, in the case of what we write? You know, how does it affect their character? And if you can just think in those terms, I think it helps to, you know, just understand how the writing process works.
Agreed. I think that's wonderful advice. And so I guess my last question to you for the night is, I know that, you know, you do write these incredible stories on fan fiction, but are you planning to go real world anytime soon with any of your writings?
Yes, I do have a plan. So actually, I took traffic down recently off of AO3 and fan fiction, because I'm actually going to take that, and I have been working the last couple months to plot that out, and I'm scrapping like half of what I have to turn that into an original. I have actually considered turning Fire and Ice into original, but again, I'd probably cut out like the back half of what I would write and change it.
Mm-hmm.
Because my plan for that one is not so medically realistic, but I'm going to tweak medicine for certain things in that story that I'm not going to tell you because it's going to spoil it for you.
Please don't. You know, I hate spoil sports.
I know. Yeah, but I do want to write professionally. The dream has always been to write professionally, and I think fan fiction just got me writing again in the first place, which I am very happy about. And I probably would be working more on traffic right now, but everyone is begging me to please finish The Disease before the sequel comes out. So I'm really pushing myself trying to finish that right now.
Completely understandable given, you know, the nature of the beast.
Yes.
um
Yes.
but that being said, for those who will be listening, because I'm going to be mentioning this obviously on fan fiction and AO3, definitely follow Elohiniar on, you know, I know she has DeviantArt, she has Twitter, and make that following, you know, transition. I know that's so important when we're talking about going from fan fiction to real world writing and making it original stuff. And let me just say that I am fully 100% backing your writing, even though I think that traffic might be a little too tough for me. I would 100% purchase the book, read the first chapter, cry, and then put it down. But you totally have my purchase and support.
Yeah, no,
But
traffic would be a it's a hard one. It's actually funny because the way I literally am writing that story is like Rin, or her name is actually going to be Shizuka's point of views, are very traumatic, but the whole brothers chapters are hilarious. The banter between them is so funny that half the time you're crying, and the other half the time it's like,
the
what?
necessary comedic relief.
Oh yes, they're totally like, their banter is my comedic relief. Like, I use it to break up the heaviness of that story. So yeah.
Well, like many of your followers, of your audience members, we are going to be so super thrilled to see it, to support it. So if you're not following her already on Twitter, please do. We will definitely tag the name below. And we're going to like totally encourage you guys to just stick on board. Like, there's just so much happening, not only within the fandom, because obviously the sequel is coming back. So many people are coming back, finishing up stories, finishing up loose ends, which I love, because finally we're seeing some things, you know, be put back in motion. But also, I think that this fandom has really created just opportunity for so many people who, you know, who wouldn't have thought of going professional in writing to do so. There are so many people that have gone from fan fiction to their own original self-published works that it's actually incredible. And we wish them all the best of luck, and we should definitely support them. So are there any words of advice or wisdom that you would like to drop before going?
That's right. That's all I have to say. Like, that's what I tell the people that I work with, and I work with a broad variety of other writers, all fan fiction based. Just write and live your dreams and write what you want. And well, actually, one of them would say that I tell her to not always write what we want, because you got to work on character growth, you know.
This is true.
But if the only way to start writing is to write, so that's my only advice.
So just do it, folks. Again, we're so thankful that you came and spent your time with us tonight. And that is going to be all. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Esther Alexis, Body of an Extrovert.